Just before we start with the conversation, which will happen in English, I just have a few thank yous and quick notes. As you will see behind us, the exhibition Bingo has been open since April 25th. So we're on our 5th day today. Donc, l'expo est ouverte depuis le 25 avril. Vous pouvez la visiter au 451 rue Saint-Jean, qui est le bâtiment pas très loin d'ici. On est très fiers de l'expo. Évidemment, la conversation d'aujourd'hui va avoir comme point central l'exposition. Donc, on va parler de certaines des œuvres qui font partie de l'expo. Je vais parler moins que Nico. C'est l'objectif. Mais on veut aussi vous entendre. On veut entendre vos questions, évidemment. Donc, on va parler pendant une quarantaine de minutes, puis ensuite, on va pouvoir ouvrir aux questions du public en anglais ou en français. I can do the live translation as we go, and we'll test out my bilingual Montreal skills for the evening. Avant de commencer la conversation, before we start our conversation, je veux prendre un moment pour lire la première partie de l'énoncé de reconnaissance territoriale que Nico a composé spécifiquement pour l'exposition. C'est dans notre habitude de faire un énoncé de reconnaissance territoriale avant nos événements chez FI, mais en conversation avec Nico autour de l'expo, il semblait important que cette notion de reconnaissance-là soit articulée de manière spécifique par l'artiste, en conversation aussi. Puis je trouve que c'est un texte très, très bien écrit. Je pense lui et moi, on est très fiers de ce texte-là, donc j'ai envie de vous en partager la première partie. Le texte fait aussi partie de la brochure d'exposition, puis accueille en fait les visiteurs juste avant l'entrée dans l'exposition. Donc c'est vraiment la première ou une des premières pièces d'information que les gens voient avant même de voir la grande majorité des œuvres dans l'exposition. Je vais lire en français et l'adapter aussi pour ce soir. Donc, FI et l'atelier de Nico Williams opèrent sur un territoire autochtone qui n'a jamais été cédé. Les instances gouvernantes des Premières Nations n'ont jamais signé quelconque traité ou accord qu'il soit qui céderait légalement quelconque partie de l'île de Montréal à une administration coloniale, telle que le Québec, le Canada ou la Couronne. En d'autres termes, nous opérons, visitons ou vivons tous sur un territoire autochtone qui a été volé. Je pense qu'il n'y a rien de plus direct que ça. Donc, merci Nico d'avoir écrit ça. Thank you, Nico, for writing this acknowledgement.
Thank you.
All right. So I guess the way that we should structure this talk is around the exhibition. So we have a few images, some professional, some obviously non-professional, taken from my camera. So I do apologize for the variety of quality of images you'll see behind us as we talk. And this, you might notice, is one photo I've taken myself, which explains its allure. But I think it's an exciting place to start the conversation because it's something new in your practice. It's the one piece in the exhibition that does not have beadwork.
Well, absolutely. This exhibition is comprised of works that have taken years to make. We started beading in around 2014. And the funny part about this exhibition was when you had first approached me, the list was works that were already made, and then half the other list was works that we're still making and ideas. So we kept working all the way up until the actual mounting of the exhibition, one day before doors opened. And I just want to acknowledge the studio team that has worked very hard behind the practice. We have Yubei, Molly Shemaine, Ioana Dragomir, Virginie Filion-Facto, Felipe Gonzalez Avila, Samuel Gertain, Alex Haven, Elena Amari, Christy Kaninsky, Selena Latour, Yuzin Louis, Emlyn Marchand, Hannah Materne, Carolyn Moyne, Cassie Payne, Sonja Ratke, Laurel H. Rennie, Lydia Rizzi, Ku Del Rosario, Aidan Thorne, Patrick Vase, and Jan. The reason why I ended with Ann Jan, because she was doing our, literally that's the post, Ann Jan.
And Jan.
Because we kept adding people to this exhibition and the production of it. But, you know, this was an interesting project. I remember it happened around Christmas, and I was like driving from London, Ontario, back home. Back to Montreal. And I stopped at this guy who has this like court case coming. So he had to sell his collection, and he had like, you know, one of those sort of fur things on his head. And he just looked really crazy there. And my friend Mandy Borland, she was like, "You're not going to stop at this guy's house on the way there. Like, please report back after." And then so when I went through his collection, there was a lot of indigenous things there. There was like birch bark baskets, wigwas canoes, blankets. And it was all in this man's suburban house. And then I just remember seeing this chief, and we were building things for the pawn shop. And then I asked the guy, I was like, "Okay, how much for the chief?" And because I was like, every tobacco shop needs a cigar chief. That's literally the beginning of the chain of thought. And then when you actually started to break down what that chief represented, because I remember just picking it up, giving him the transaction happened, and then on the way out the door being like, "Oh, I'm gonna cover him in gold." And then he started shouting like, "You can't, it's an original Gallagher." And I even remember talking with Dom from the gallery being like, "Can I put gold over this original work of art?" Because when you actually started to research what this chief was and what it represented, it was like a multi-layered unpack of the work.
So the sculpture, the wood carving that you bought around Christmas time, I remember the Instagram messages about that. It was what we call a cigar store Indian. So it's a sculpture. It's a wood sculpture about 4 feet high, painted, sort of multicolored. It's sort of an quote unquote Indian chief holding a box of cigars, right? And sculpted by this artist called Ralph Gallagher, who's, I think we found out through research, known for specifically his cigar store Indians. He was sort of like the prime sculptor of that form. And so you acquired an original Gallagher, not really looking for one or knowing what it represented, right?
Absolutely.
And then I think conversations unfolded around this notion of reproduction, right? Which is, I think, a strategy that comes up in your work again and again. As you're beading, you're reproducing objects from everyday experience, making them into, using a different materiality to highlight some details. And then the discussion was, what do we do with this, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to dip it in gold? And then what happened is...
Oh my gosh, I just remember when I had opening down on the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, I was driving with Samuel Gerta, who works in the studio, to the world's largest dream catcher. And while we were driving out to the world's largest dream catcher, we saw this wood carver who was making these folk arty alien and predator figurines in the woods. And we're like, who is this guy? Do you know what I mean? And then I took his business card and came back to Montreal here, and I was working in the studio. And then when I was told that I wasn't able to go over an original, to think about the Gallagher family and how they continue to carve these figures, and how during a period when we weren't allowed to even be Anishinaabe or practice our culture, you had people able to carve Indigenous figures, our likeness of them. And when you actually look behind the form that it was representing, it's an advertisement for tobacco, because the crown wouldn't allow tobacco to be advertised at a certain height. So then somebody had figured it out, like his grandfather who had taught him how to carve these was like, oh, I'll figure out a way to deal with the king. I'll make these figures that can just stand and be a representation of an advertisement for tobacco, because that was their resource and we're now selling it.
And so you commissioned a reproduction of the original Gallagher sculpture from this folk art wood carver man in Manitoulin Island.
Yes, Don, right?
Yeah, Don.
Oh my gosh, Don. He was like, I was like, okay, I want you to copy the original figurine. So I like took a picture, front, back, all of that. And I have like drawings and illustrations. This guy was like sending me things and like snap pictures. And I was like, yeah, just copy the original. Like he was refusing to copy it. And then all of a sudden he's making 3 of them. And I was like, where's all 3 of those coming from? And it became exciting. He was just sending me, he's like, oh, we're going to put this one in a vest. And I was like, this does not look like the original. So the form you're actually seeing now is another edition when we brought it back to Montreal, because I was like, Don did not listen. So then we got Patrick Vase to work on the piece. And then it became interesting because like there was like a detail there. There's like a rich history of, French carvers with bois or wood. And it's like really interesting to think of Don not listening in the bush. And then you have Patrick coming and like adding those finesse and details, and then, covering this thing in thousands of dollars of gold because we don't know how to leaf or finish. And I was like, it has to be pure. And then to see this thing like unsanded, we're going to sand the other 2 versions. There's 2 more versions coming. So it doesn't go into its pores. Literally, you drop it. And I was like, Jan, that thing just sucked the gold right into its face. And then you'd have to put another layer on, and it would like start to like leaf it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the sculpture is hungry for gold. Or,
Just eating it.
Yeah, eating away at the gold.
Yeah.
I think when I hear you talk about this piece, 2 things come to mind, but I want to pick up on one, which is in this process, like in many of your works, you have a sort of fluctuating role, right? Where you're artist, but you're also a collector, and you commission pieces, and things are articulated in a way where making it becomes complicated somehow, right? You complicate the making of an object.
All the time.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how to do it. And then I'll be like watching YouTube videos and I'm like, but I just want it to look like this. And then, to see something arrive and come to the attention. So we put it right in the front. Yeah. Looking up at the Bingo Damned bingo
with the
font.
title.
Yeah, everything was just like unfolding up to the very last minute. And then it's like, oh, as this tours to other venues, it can have a relationship to this.
But I think it's interesting because all of those positions, right, that I mentioned, the sort of the collector or your curator, also you've just recently curated or co-curated an exhibition of prints by Carl Beam.
Oh yeah, that just opened in Vancouver. The text is out. We opened it 2 days after the show here. I didn't realize the overlap. And then so I just remember reaching out to Anong Beam and being like, happy birthday to your father. I hope that I did him well. So I even I rewrote how his bio was approached in the past, like addressing the Woodland School. We're Anishinaabe people. We're still not recognized. Even meeting with the Governor General, I was like, we're still not recognized. It would be nice if we would be. So always something a little political, but playful too. Yeah.
But I think those roles allow for the more political side of your work to come through also, right? Because you're putting yourself in a position where you're sharing authorship of the work, or the structure that you're proposing is a little more horizontal, but it also highlights the collaborative nature of the process, right? I remember Nico and I have been working on projects since 2020, and this exhibition is the 3rd project we've worked on together. And every time there's always an opening to other people, right? You're trying to bring people into the fold, which is really admirable, and I think speaks to the generosity of your nature. I don't want to cover you in compliments, but I think it should be said. It shows in the work, I think, that you're doing. But also it means the work comes through collaboration. And if there are pieces that are being made with the studio team, it's a collaboration, but it's also sometimes a collaboration with people outside of that core studio team. Like we see in the image behind us, right? The piece that's at the back with a sort of red and dark beadwork and then the sort of velvet, the green velvet. This is the first project we worked on together during the pandemic, where we sent out beadwork kits to 25 people living in so-called Canada, and we would meet up online every Wednesday or every 2 weeks, maybe. I can't remember. The pandemic is a little fuzzy, like I guess it is for most people here. I don't know. I don't want to assume, but and people would learn how to bead and like through your workshops, and would send back the swatches that they'd made, and this is sort of the resulting project, which is also sort of the genesis of the collaboration with Phi and our working together. So I think it was really important to have it be in the exhibition as we come in, right?
Absolutely. And I just realized right now, like putting beadwork on textiles that were already fabricated, like you being able to thematically put this together, I was like, oh my gosh, I was actually thinking that. And I hadn't realized that there was that relation. And it was really generous of you to be able to weave those stories together, because
I mean, your work allows for that, right? Is that I think as we put works, like the exhibition covers about a decade of your work, and so I think it's a decade is a good period of time where you can look back at what you've done and figure out kind of what are recurring obsessions, what themes are sort of present, but also sort of in the background of things that you do, how the strategies for making the work evolve through time. But this notion of collaboration has been there from our working together, but I find it beautiful that it echoes also another collaboration, which is a collaboration with your grandmother, which we see in the exhibition now. So the piece that's at the back of the sidewall that you can't really see, you only see at an angle, which says Bones Back, is a collaboration with your grandma.
Absolutely. And it had started with the St. Dollar cross stitch I had found that I put land back over, that I had found at a friperie. And I started to think about land and how beads could narrate that movement that is happening right now. And actually, when I started to research it, I got so angry, but I had to put some light into it. And the Bones Back piece was actually a conversation that had started with Rianne Chartrand. Today, she just wrote me asking if she could present this work on a project that she's talking about today. And I was like, yes, absolutely, because that happened at Renee Kondo's studio. She was talking about how institutions in Canada have our ancestral bones in their care, and that their board gets to determine where those bones go. And it was just like an unpacking of horror stories of, schools trading heads of different communities or people or races, never white people. They were always just trading the others around and trying to make us be primitive or something. And it was just so wrong. So like people show up and a head is missing in a school institution right now because it was traded in the 40s, to think about our bodies. Or even now when condo development happens, instead of putting those bodies there, like 140 or 180 people, they put them into the museum's care and then start building their condo. So to think about ancestral beings being taken from land. And even when I was researching Carl Beam's work, that his story of talking about land and body and how there is this realm of the spirit in Anishinaabe practices, that when we were looking at land, we were also looking at spirit and each other. So that's an interesting work. I'm just putting it together in my head right now. I was collaborating with the most beautiful grandmother ever, and collaborating with the dead and putting Bones Back. And she was from Belfast. My res grandma lived 5 minutes away. So it's interesting to see even what was available. Like the colony would have clean drinking water, and then I go 5 minutes down the road to my grandma Sadie's from Kettle Point Res, living on Aamjiwnaang. She would, have water that tasted a little off, and I'd always smuggle food from my grandma Joyce's house to the res to give to the cousins. So to think that it was just changing once you went across the road. Yeah. But it was interesting to collaborate with a spirit, I guess. Yeah.
So the work it's an inlay of beadwork. It's a sort of a strip of a beaded text that says "Bones Back," added onto a needle point that your grandma made.
Absolutely. And to think about like the fonts, even I kept going through all these fonts. I had chosen that like old English font that had been used by Indian Affairs, or like the very first font that would have started writing papers, because they would like, if a crime happened, they'd blame an Indian, because then it'd make the group go up against them in fear as the government tried to take more and start that displacement of communities and narrow something that was very vast onto tiny little reservations. And yeah, it starts with the land that they want. And then right now, like in this last decade, taking bones and just putting them into a museum. Yeah.
So the first floor of the exhibition is really takes it's anchored in this notion of territory, right? And I think there are works that address very specifically this notion of land or shifting land, and the representation of nationhood, right? Like I'm thinking about the camping chairs that we don't see in this image, but it's interesting that it gets complicated through the museum is also present and has it interferes into our relationship with the land and with with ancestors, which I think it needs to be explicited.
Like, even this little frame picture here is like when you blew up the St. Lawrence Seaway to get into the Great Lakes region, to open up those freighters that would come in, and to think about like, you know, the missing people on those freighters, where they go, and like all the resources pouring in and out. Like right there's the gate in the red box, you know, against the green velvet. Yeah, really interesting. And then we have the gold highways there. Yeah, it's really abstract all the time, but it's a layered lasagna of thoughts and beautiful people that have made it. Yeah, many people have worked on these things.
I think lasagna might be one of the best terms
lasagna.
I've heard to describe your work. I relate to that as a lasagna fan, as I'm sure other people in this room are. So if we're moving from first to second floor, I've titled this floor Queer. And the first grouping of works that welcome us are these bandanas that are called Friendship and Trade, patchwork, black and red. And to me, they're quite ambiguous works. I think I'm still processing how I feel about them, and I think we both were in conversation, right? We did think a lot about how they would be presented, but I want to talk maybe about the fabrication of these specific works. And we're not going to get into the fabrication of each piece because that would be too long, but I think
2 years.
Yeah, these ones warrant a bit of a backstory. So how did these get made?
Well, it started on a boat trip to Murano. And I've been to Constantini Glass before previously, like two biennials ago, or three biennials ago. So 6 years ago, I would have been there. And I met Constantini glassmakers. It's a family in Murano that holds dead stock handmade beads. So the smallest ones there, there's the little beaded mistake right there that I've fallen in love with. We literally ran out of beads. I call it the cursed bandana. But I'm getting a connection with it. I'm always looking at each work as animate, and I've started to get a relationship with this one. But the beads that you're seeing here are beads that would have been used during the trade and negotiation of friendships that were to be built. Like Montreal used to send 89 canoes down to the Great Lakes region to have access to the lakes. And then when Canada became a country and Quebec became a province within it, we were sort of abandoned, and then, you know, the gifts didn't come down. And then so I started to think about like how beads and materials and thread and all of that was traded for land. Well, supposedly traded. Just it was a friendship that was happening. And I actually fell in love with like the vintage red white heart beads, and like they're still there, and to think about like those materials and how they were used. But it's also a collaboration with Czech glass beads too, for certain details. Yeah.
So I don't want to get too technical about the beads that you're using, but I think I could nerd out about that for a bit. I've become sort of a bead enthusiast unwillingly, I think, in working with you. And now I'm getting a lot of bead ads on Instagram, but that's another matter.
Yeah, just like...
But most of the beads that you're using that would be used for beadwork now are either Japanese or Czech beads, right? And they're a little more cylindrical than round.
Yeah, they were made in the 1980s by Mayuki. Like he had seen like the beads, and he's like, "Oh, they're like little donuts. I like the cylinder in the center, and the cylinder you can bead like." You know, they're like Lego blocks clicking together almost perfectly precise, because he had like that perfect cylinder. So that is a very precise bead. The batches are always unique in color and dyes and precious metals going into them. Like falling in love with the beads is a thing. Like I didn't know how to bead in 2014. I just was like, I need to figure out how to work with this. And this was just Czech glass beads, which is a good bead. And it's a good bead. I use them in the bandana, but the Venetian glass, when you like see the handmade beads, and it's just, you can fall in love with beads. But the Mayuki beads, you can get very precise little details. You can do tomato sauce dripping out of like a ketchup bottle in different tones, or like, you know, the shade of an orange, because they're still in production today, and they have like 3,000 different types of colors and finishes, and rolling the beads in sand to get a matte finish, but then they're delicate, and then they break while you're working as a team in the studio, or you start to fall in love with certain shades, but it has too much cadmium, so then it like busts or something.
And in opposition, the Venetian beads are a little rounder, and they're more fragile and have a bit more character, as I like to say.
Yeah, like they're from the 1800s. Some of these beads. Yeah, well, these ones, very old, and I wanted to intentionally use them. So I want to go back to Murano and get more beads. I'm coming back, Constantini, if you're listening. I like
just have to knock on the door.
Yeah, actually, the first time I showed up, I knocked on his door right away. I got off the plane, went on a boat, went there. They close at 5. I was like 15 minutes to 5. And then he was just there. You hear all this glass breaking, and I'm like knocking on his door like the little buzzer. And he opens, and he has like cuts on his hand, and he's like bleeding. And I was like, "Hi, can I come see
Is this a good time?
Is this a good time?" He's like, "No, not right now." And then he was just so mad at me. And then I was like, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." And
you got them.
Yeah.
I like that story.
Yeah, there's many.
I'm noticing that we're sort of following Amelia in all the pictures. Amelia's right there. It's funny. She's sort of like a ghost figure in all the images. And she's here, so you know she's escaped the gallery after this photo shoot. That's encouraging. Right across from the 3 bandanas of friendship and trade is a piece called Flamer, which is really spectacular in terms of its making. It's really a mesmerizing piece. I think hasn't been shown a lot.
No, I was like, Daniel, thank you for bringing it out. I love seeing it like out of the crate, you know, and in the light of public being able to experience it. It showed out in the prairies one time, so it's nice to see it here, and it looks very happy when you're in front of the work. And this work, how do you feel about it? You somehow put it into the floor called queer. Like, had I told you the meaning behind the work, or you just saw it as that?
I think we had conversations about it, but I kind of intuited a little bit of it. But I think what I wrote about it in the exhibition text is that There's an interesting ambiguity in the work that I'm drawn to, and I think that sort of like flame pattern of like the late '90s, early aughts is very specific to people of our generation. Like I can very much locate it to being 15, and I'm sure you do too, right? So it locates it kind of historically, or I guess in our history and culturally.
Absolutely. I had these like the pattern like this, like when I was around that age. Yeah, it just has something to deal with like ceremony and football players. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. You get this story later.
Yeah. But I remember also the presentation is interesting, right? Because I remember seeing it the first time in a studio visit, and it was in your studio on a bench.
Was it?
Yeah, it was out for the world to enjoy.
Oh, amazing.
And I think it was maybe gonna go somewhere, but it didn't. Anyways, that's another story. But I remember seeing it. I was very intrigued because it's very different from, I think the way that you're integrating display in it is very different than your usual practice. So I was intrigued by the story you were hinting at or drawing to with the integration of that, and I think we pushed it a little bit further with the tiled plinth, which is my addition.
Yeah,
because I think it brings it's a locker room, but it's also a bathhouse. It's a little bit ambiguous, I guess. I think it's good to live with ambiguity.
Oh yeah,
a motto for our era.
Yeah,
and then this piece, which stops everyone in their tracks.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it took us a summer. There was like times where my face, I'd just be putting my hands and like, how do we figure it out? Because like when I was making work, it would be like, two surfaces, and then looking at a flannel, you're thinking, just the construction of it. You see, I saw it flat, and then I realized that it's very many dimensions. It's a body. It's not like shorts where you're just like, a curve. It's like many curves and details. And the team worked so hard on that summer, and it had premiered in New York City for the Armory. And I remember Candace Hopkins writing me so excited about this piece, and she was like, oh my gosh, Beck just asked me to go and see the flannel. So people would ask to come to see it when it was in certain location, like because it was in the certain booth at the Blue End Division space, and people would ask to go look at it, which was very special. Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting piece in relation to Flamer also, because I guess there are the two works in the exhibition that suggest a body or, the presence or an absence rather. And I think in Uncle specifically, the body gets articulated a little more. Like with Flamer, you get a sense that the shorts have been worn, but there's no, they're just there as an item of clothing. This is articulated or presented in a way where you really feel the volume of the body of the person wearing it, almost like it's a ghost wearing it somehow. Or I think it's all in the way that you choose to present it. And I thought it important to sort of present it in a way that's a little more, not like this is a little flatter, but I think in the exhibition, it's just slightly more open.
It's like a breath. It's actually Helena Corsten's grandfather's flannel. And to think about it's a bush coat. I want it to represent this narrative, looking at like the walleye wars down in Wisconsin, thinking about hunting and fishing rights. But then you'll have curators touring the Gotchman collection saying, oh, is he talking about bear culture? And I'm talking about bear culture, but not that bear culture.
Shooting bears.
Hunting. And so it goes in many different aspects of people's nostalgia, and that's exciting when you have made something that represents identity like that. But this work is made for Helena's grandfather, and I called it Uncle because it's Uncle Helena. So that's the funny part. People always forget it's for Helena, and she was at the Sobe evening seeing that, being like, I have the original there. If you go see it, it's in checkout. Yeah, that's just having that is wonderful. Yeah.
Your relationship to the objects that you've beaded, like that you've copied in beadwork or reappropriated through beadwork, that's always I'm always intrigued by the way you treat those objects. You have an exhibition at FOFA right now, which kind of addresses that too, right? Where you're showing some beadwork alongside the original objects that have inspired the beadwork. So you'll see, I think it's a packet of like sunflower seeds with the original packet.
Yeah,
you're
today,
really keep things.
Well, even today, like when we were talking, you're like, why don't you just give out an original? And I was like, I can't give out the original. So showing the archives there with the beadwork, I'm like emotionally connected to maybe the archive, because that's the encounter. It's that intimate encounter, you know. And then Helena would not give me her flannel. She's like, you are not allowed to touch it. So I had to buy another flannel on Amazon to tear it apart, take a picture of her flannel, and then put it together. Because she's like, you're gonna tear apart my grandfather's flannel, trying to figure it out. It's not a VHS box, you know, like so. Yeah. And to think also, I was doing research with the BANQ on like the actual public library of Quebec.
Yeah.
And the most popular novel taken out was Harlequin romance novels. Did you know that? I didn't, but it was actually fact. And so I used Harlequin romance novel font for Tough Guy. And it's like an Ojibwe guy spearfishing off the edge of his birch bark canoe.
I'm sure many Harlequin romance novels have a guy wearing a flannel on them.
No, just on the label.
I wouldn't know. I don't read that stuff.
Yeah.
And then we move to Pawn Stars. So you've talked about Uncle, and I guess Pawn Stars is born out of UNC collection, which is
Unks.
Unc's collection.
Yeah, Uncle Nico's collection.
Uncle Nico's collection. So for those of you who haven't seen the exhibition, I'll just maybe do a brief summary of the project. It's in its third iteration.
Yeah.
Revised and augmented, I think, as editors would say. It's an installation that mimics a pawn shop.
Yeah.
And it includes some of your beadwork alongside historical beadwork. So at the back, you see 5 bandolier bags from, I think they're mostly Ojibwe.
Yeah,
19th century, Anishinaabe.
Yeah.
19th century, made in the 19th century. And then, so your beadwork is in conversation with historical pieces, but also pieces from 16 other beadwork artists from your personal collection.
17, wasn't it?
I think 16.
16.
Yeah.
So many. I kept adding people over and over and over.
Yeah.
Like at first we were 19, and then we kept
I
going
think
back
16.
and forth.
Yeah, we are. I was always like, oh, there's another one. Yeah.
Beadwork artists. Like we have Elias Not Afraid, Catherine Blackburn, Jean Marshall, like people that it's so hard to get their work because of the drops on Instagram and that community that's happening, and seeing them being able to sustain their practice and to highlight what they're making. Like we even have like the Indian Time legendary watch on view there. Because when you think about going to the pawn shop on the res, often you'll see beadwork there, $40 or something, you know, just sitting there. So this time we really wanted to show their work and show it in a way that Indigenous people would display their work. I wanted it to be resi. We have like a twisted tea floor color because like Dom, the gallery director, was like, oh, if you look at Compton, it's actually blue and yellow. And then I was like, oh my God, that's like twisted tea. So to like have this sort of resi approach, making the work, and then even hiring Patrick and being like, we need Pepsi wood, you know, to make the the frames that would go around it.
I feel like I need to explain what Pepsi wood is because you
Oh, yeah.
keep using that term and people are
It's a
always like
thing.
Pepsi wood.
It's a material.
So they're wooden crates from the, I guess, 1950s?
40s and 50s.
40s and 50s that would have been used to carry Pepsi bottles. And so they have like Pepsi logos all over them. And I love it because of like oak, instead of oak wood or
Pepsi wood.
like ash wood becomes Pepsi wood, which I love. The beverage becomes the essence of the wood. But I mean, it has a really dark undertone, right? Because Pepsi was the most bought
beverage on reserves, because before clean drinking water was available, like water drinking trends today where you can buy all these bottled water, Pepsi stayed at 5 cents and you could get 12 ounces for it. So water crises have been happening on reservations since the 40s or earlier. And so that's why it's actually in our culture somehow, like in our communities. Like I was even flipping through this photo album of my family the other day because we're trying to find a new flannel pattern. And there's like a picture there of my dad holding like me or someone. And then you see in wine cups, little glasses of Pepsi. I was like, no, they were not. They're not drinking Pepsi out of that. And that's the 90s, a photo documenting that to think about Pepsi. But also we have like tobacco lids in there. And we have like IKEA findings holding up jewelry, and then we rubbed copper on it. Just to think about the material, to think about how copper, the largest deposit, was extracted from the Great Lakes region, and to think about artifacts and things our ancestors being melted down into copper pennies and wires. Yeah.
And the notion of pawning also is it's complex, right? It's, a pawn shop and its visual, and its aesthetics is the complete opposite of a standard museum display. Objects are treated very differently in both institutions, but somehow there's something about pawning that happens in museums, right? It's like you
absolutely, and it's all accessories. Like even Marcy Friesen's beaded smoke. Like I don't know if you know who Amanda Roy is, but when she'll go to art galleries or exhibitions with beadwork, she'll pop her Marcy Friesen in, so then they don't know if she took one from the exhibit or if it was an accessory she was carrying around. But to think about that smoke and how that was originally beaded for Marcy's father, and she'd go fishing with them a lot, and then for it to be an accessory rather than earrings or a medallion, how we even use the medallion as like a layout for the stones on the ground of the chairs on the first floor. There's always a connection to the body and how the colonists brought us the beads, and then we really took that material and turned it into something the world had never seen before. I was on a panel with someone from Murano, Venice, whose family was the stringers of the beads. So they would be like the hot alleyways of Venice, and they would just be stringing beads out of giant bowls all day. The traders would come, and they didn't know what was being made with it till like hundreds of years later, and then they see these beautiful regalias in boxes of like glass in museums, because like they thought our culture was dying. So that's why all the things don't have glass on it. But then you have the actual things we beaded in the studio in this glass with ancestor works too. Those baskets are beautiful. But to have this kid in the 90s, me, sitting at my grandma's living room on a mattress with cousins, watching these movies, playing Pocahontas, Sega, Genesis, as we had that poster of this crying Navajo woman looking back at us. Like if you think about the layout of the gallery and how it's situated, I think about, the cousins and I being on that mattress watching these films, trying to figure out what it is to be Ojibwe or Anishinaabe, but we're just watching these films that are
being produced by American studios.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have like that poster my grandma would have had up, crying, looking at us. Yeah.
The Indian Prophecy poster.
Indian Prophecy. Oh, I love that piece. Yeah, and the two found lamps side by side. I love it.
It's a shame we don't have a picture of it, but you have to go see it.
It's so good. Yeah, all the cousins are on the mattress watching those movies, so we put them in the box. Yeah.
I see, as always, when we have a conversation together, that time flies by us, because I could just hear you talk about anything for hours, but we do have time to talk, maybe not about the IKEA bag.
We all know IKEA.
But
I was there yesterday.
Shout out to IKEA.
Yo.
But about this, because it inspires the title of the exhibition, and it's a series of work that you've created for the exhibition at FI. It's called Indian Hustle, and I'd like to hear you talk a little about the idea behind it and what inspired it and why it's in the exhibition.
Indian Hustle. Wow, I was just out for bowling on Friday night with Amanda Lickers, and we were talking, and I was like, you posted about it, and one of your students was looking at the beaded ticket and said Indian Hustle. Like she was like, Indian Hustle. And I was like, that's what it is, It's us playing bingo and like that sovereignty, thinking of that like space where if you're on a reservation that you're able to make your own economies, bring economies in, because actually we're not allowed to have bingo halls without permission from certain communities surrounding us in Canada. But in the United States, people are buying land back. We can't do that here yet in Canada. It will change. But to think about how those acts of those halls is bringing in economy. People are able to support the lodge. We're able to get money back. We're able to get our culture back with it. I think this piece is like echoes of our grandparents playing bingo in the 90s or 80s, or like having their lucky troll dolls and going out to play to win, and like even playing with groups of artists and friends, going out to the bingo hall near the res here. Every time I'm like going on tour, I always see if there's a bingo hall on a res nearby. I only play on the res. But we will be having a bingo show game happening with 5 very exciting prizes. I'm not allowed to say what they are. But yeah, I was at IKEA yesterday. No, it's just kidding.
Hint. Yeah.
No, who knows? But to think about being able to support. So that's why I was even excited talking about, like, that's what I was working on today, just like texting away, being like, we got to get these hosts and all this for this game coming up on the May 2-4 weekend, which is the first holiday that Canada sort of invented, because they're like, oh, we're extracting all these resources. We need something to celebrate. And they're like, May 2-4, Victoria Day? It was like, to think about genders needing to play their roles, also think they wanted the men to parade and the women to get ready and to picnic, to celebrate the extraction and abundance that the land had to offer. And to think as they were like tricking us, and like there was treaties, but there's also the forced surrenders. We had to give land to churches, so you'll see our totems on these. And when you read about what actually happened, like they would see like an Indigenous woman having a brooch, and they would ask her during a treaty signing or surrender and be like, where did you get that beautiful brooch? And then for her to point in a direction of a mine, and for them to record in government records, land that has never, a mine that has never been touched by white hands, and to go and to take that. Yeah, it's really exciting to be able to have some form of sovereignty on our reserves. And that's what these tickets really represent. And, I think we were going to name them so many different things. Like, do we just name it Bingo Ticket? Do we just name it that? But, when it was like Indian Hustle, it was just that moment where it's like, that's what this is and represents, because it's artists and friends.
And in the exhibition also, they're in conversation with two series of lotto tickets that you'd produced. I want to say maybe 5 years ago, right? Mot Caché and then the bingo lotto tickets, and those are produced by L'Auto-Québec, and so that articulation, right, of presenting
and Christmas.
pieces, yeah,
Christmas. Like when I thought of the lotto tickets, because my mom would give it at Christmas. You want tickets? I go Christmas. Yeah.
That's it's a
But
good,
to think about,
good thing for the Christmas.
that's our treaty annual, like our annual payments. Like we'll get it at Christmas. So that's why I'm even looking through my Christmas book right now. I mean, the family album, and seeing a lot of Christmas decorations. And I'm like, what is that relation? And that's because, our $5 would come in
on Christmas.
Yeah.
It's a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. May 2/4, Christmas is also in 2/4.
May 2/4, yeah.
So Nico just shouted out our bingo event, which will be happening soon. It's a bit of a scoop. It hasn't been announced yet, but it's happening May 24th in collaboration with the National Gallery of Canada and the Sobey Foundation for the Arts and FOFA Gallery. It'll be happening here at 407 Saint-Pierre. Tickets will be on sale soon, so if you want to come and play bingo with us, I hear exciting prizes could be won.
I'm just
saying.
Yeah.
More on that later. I think we're ready to open the floor to questions, and then if people are too shy, I can keep talking. But I feel like this is a good time to open the floor up. Any questions? Don't be shy. We're very nice. Oh, there you go. I just have to say we're nice, and then people raise their hands.
Thanks for being nice. Nico, I heard, I saw your stuff at the National Gallery, and it was amazing, really blown away. And someone told me that you designed the stuff using Excel.
Oh, not Excel, Adobe.
Adobe, all right.
Yeah.
Because someone
Adobe
told me you
Illustrator.
did it on a spreadsheet, and it was like actually putting all of the beads and coloring all of the cells in a spreadsheet.
We
and I wanted to know if
build
that
our
was true.
grids. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we build our grids, and then we start to it's literally done by hand drawing on the computer, and then we print it, and then, not Excel.
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
Oh my gosh. No, but I still use the physical all the time. I'm always using the same pattern over, but then I'll measure it with a beadwork I already made. And today, Ioana was working in the studio on something coming up, and they were like, oh my gosh, that's a ghost transfer. How is that possible with this? It's Adobe. How do you have a ghost transfer? So she thinks the computer's haunted. Yeah.
You have had computer problems. The printer is also always misbehaving, and tricky. Any other questions?
Thank you for this beautiful conversation. I really appreciate that. And Nico, I'm wondering, what's your relationship to beadwork's traditional roots, but also the contemporary art world, and then being it shown in institutional institutions that are not part of our communities, and sometimes are just beginning now to see beadwork as something that has value as an art form. What's your relationship between that traditional and contemporary clash, maybe?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that thought of value. We can't say value too much because then everybody's gonna know. No, just kidding. But when I'm working with works created by the ancestors, even the bandolier bags, the last place that we had them was in Quebec City, and we actually feasted them. We put some stuff down for them, and then I was supposed to take it to the lodge, but their lodge was flooded. My friend, she has such bad luck when we were driving. I was like, you're just cursed. Every time, I was even going out to Giant Tiger last night. You're quit saying things, Nico. And the power had turned out. So I was like, you're just cursed. I can't bring my things to bring to the lodge for feasting. So there is that acknowledgement to ceremony always with these works. And then with the contemporary beadwork, I guess, I do approach my works as animate. Still, I'm always trying to look at them as animate, trying not to insult them too much, like the one with the beads that the curse bandana,
Yep.
starting to warm up to it. But also thinking of like custodianship also, and reaching out to the makers of this Pawn Stars component that was put on Daniel about two months before, or 3 months. And, you know, we had to...
2 months.
We were sending out like requests for permission to show the work because I had purchased it. Thinking of the Stone Child piece, for instance, is the Stone Child? It's over
You
there.
can sort of see it.
Yeah.
At the...
So we had to like send like a request to a prison in Saskatchewan from the maker, you know, and be like, can you participate? Do you want to? And then now, you know, getting the right forms to get payment out to them. Like even if their work wasn't valued at the rate that we're getting, I've always valued it much more. So to think about what currency means to the work, just the care, because we have living artists that have made these, to reach out, like that relationship is wonderful, and to be able to share these things with you, and even the humor behind it. Like I was like, hey Marcy, can I put a bunch of gold plating gold leaf under your smoke to make it glow? And then it didn't glow enough the first time. We're gonna make it glow next edition. But I'm like there, literally like, I need to make sure Marcy is happy, you know, like treating those works as animate pieces. Yeah.
Miigwech.
Any more questions? Yes.
You had mentioned these Instagram drops. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that and maybe contrast Instagram drops for sales with the pawn shop.
Oh, not my pieces. The artists here, like all the creators that we have like Wayne Robinson and like Elias Not Afraid. There's 16 artists here that we have in the show in collaboration with the works that we beaded in the studio. And so what an Instagram drop is they'll be like, I'm about to release my earrings right now for X amount of dollars, and we'll drop it in 24 minutes or something, or 24 hours from now. And then countdowns will start, and then the earrings will go up, and then people they sell out in like seconds. But I can get work from them if I ask. I'll be like, please. Yeah.
Some good trades happening.
Some good trades, yes. But currency too. Yeah. They're like currency.
Yeah. Of
They
course.
like currency.
Yeah, it's not always tit for tat for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to maybe the complex notion of distribution and circulation, right? In the work is that beadwork, I mean, historical beadwork is often presented within the history museum context or a civilization museum context. I think it's only recently been integrated into the sort of historical art museum, quote unquote. I know the National Gallery of Canada has integrated beadwork from the 18th and 19th century into their presentation of Canadian art. And so you can see it in relation to historical painting and such. But for contemporary beadwork, and generally the market is more oriented towards jewelry, right? Or wearable items. So
yeah, like even Elias Not Afraid, like he's done beadwork for the NFL. And I had seen him at Santa Fe last market, and I had already prepaid for something. It's not on view here because he's still working on it. And I was like, Elias, where's my cuff that I bought from you? Like, but he was selling beadwork out of a shoebox on the off market of Santa Fe Indian Market. So to think about, you know, digital presence and who they are, like even having like Bobby Dews, who's like a writer for Hollywood scripts, to have his hat there, Bobby Dews, and it's signed, and I got it at an off market. He didn't bring his beadwork, but he was selling the hats that he had beaded. So to think about like vending and distribution of beadwork, you should go to Santa Fe Indian Market sometime in August. It's out of this world. Yeah, and that's when you really get to see the makers doing something. So there's always that support. Like, you know, there's playing the bingo games on the res and then buying from the makers that are living. But then there's the awful, like, buy back, which just says take back there, you know, and I had to get these ancestors back to be caretakers of them. Like the one that we have, that beaded take back.
Yeah, we see it at the center of the image. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I had bought it at a bar one night. I did not want it. And I was like, why did I get this? I was looking at the janky beadwork at first. It's not janky. It's good. But I was looking. I was like, why are you going up? Like, why are you going vertical, not horizontal? But don't start me on that. So the next day I wrote the collector. I was like, hi, I take it back. I don't want to get it. And then the collector was like, well, you purchased it and the box it came in costs more than the beadwork. And then I was like, oh my gosh. But then I started to fall in love with this bag. I became a custodian of it. It became an important being. It had to come. And when it came, the box broke. I still have the box. I'm going to exhibit it someday. And it was just pinned there, like so flat and lifeless. And then when I started to clip it off the green mounting that this person from Santa Monica, Los Angeles, I believe. Is that Santa Monica? Yeah. Had it on their wall for like decades, you know? And then I started to think about it being there, like witness to these people and how they had thought that our culture was dying and that they were presenting us like that. So when I got to clip it, it felt so good. And when I got to collaborate, because the maker had no space there, they must have like sold the bag or something. They're like, because there was some that they needed to make money, so they'd be like, you know, they'd sell it really, they'd make it really fast. But then there would be some that were just taken away, that were made for a loved one. To have two bags, it would be made for a Anishinaabe man, made by their partner. But then there would be ones for commerce. But they're all bags that would have been made with materials that would have been during the early gifting and friendship time and period that is forgotten before Canada and America formed as countries.
Well, it seems important to mention if we're talking about Instagram drops and this notion of contemporary beadwork being sold by the makers on their own platforms, there's also so many kind of networks of acquisition of objects, right? Like, so the historical beadwork you've bought on eBay or kind of online on auction sites or kind of various, right? It's sort of so you do encounter these objects in different spaces in the sort of pure archive, or even the Gallagher sculpture was sort of a marketplace buy, right? A sort of.
Well, yeah, even if you go look at that one in the center there, you're going to see so many little spirit beads. You're like, there's way too many spirits here. Do you know what I mean? They were just like going, you know, but like that hand was there. And to be able to critique, you know, your ancestors or people there, that's a great way to look at it. That's why I always look at the work as like animate, you know, a being like that little smoke, that little Marcy freezing smoke.
Yeah. I think it's a phrase you said often during the install of the exhibition is trying to infuse items with good energy.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, I think, you know, in the rush of making an exhibition, we're often very, we're very brusque with the objects, right? Like, we're careful, but we're also but I think it's caring for objects in a different way. I also remember the shock of Renee, our conservator, as you were handling the objects without gloves. And, you know, we wear like 3 pairs of gloves and we're all like sweating, touching these objects. Nico just comes in and is like, whatever, you know. It's
absolutely. And they want to be touched.
Yeah.
Like I went into...
you kept saying, I give you permission to touch without gloves.
Oh my gosh.
It felt like I was going to be imprisoned or something.
Like, please touch it.
Yeah,
like,
the punitive relationship to museum.
Well, that's how you find out. Like, literally... It was illegal to be Indigenous. It was illegal to be Anishinaabe. We were not allowed. They'd be like, you give us what you have. Also, the gift ceremonies, they're illegal.
Yeah.
You know, so then they'd be like, give us all the stuff. And then so when you get to touch it, you get to feel it. And you get to be able to remake it. And know, like literally I was at Brooklyn Museum, I was like, get me all the Anishinaabe stuff. And I'm like, that's Lenape, but... Okay, yeah, you misdocumented. We're going to be a little design of this. This is Lenape. wow. Yeah, I'm thinking of that right now. The connection.
Don't
to
touch the artworks.
Oh, I touch. Oh, no,
please,
yeah.
please don't touch the artworks.
Yeah, I'm
please.
just like, but literally, I'd flipped around a
Just saying.
bandolier one time, and that person had beaded the outline on the back, the drawing, and I was like, what the hell? So they beaded the florals on the back first, just the outline, like drawing, and then flipped it around and started to fill it in and beat it again. Just to think of like that level of care and detail. Oh, it's always been there.
Ways of caring.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I think we have time for one or two more.
Firstly, thank you, Nico. You're an incredibly generous spirit, and I can't believe how much you've made me laugh tonight. Just with all this conversation going on so far, I wondered if you could speak a little bit, because you strike me in all of your joy and the way that you come to rediscover these materials and these ancient processes and histories, that you're kind of an artist activist, because you also try to bring voice and give life to others who have been silenced through generations. So could you talk about your work in that way a little bit?
I think when you're just in front of the work, you get to celebrate it. You know, those chairs, we had Francesca Herbert that summer go into drawers, and I was like, pull everything. And then she got to touch it, but that was like, you know, I was on my studio making, and she got to work with ancestors with gloves. But I wanted to highlight the nations that had surrounded the Great Lakes region. And we've been doing some really deep research of things that have happened. And to be able to uncover this, it's just wonderful, and to share with people and to strengthen and excite people about the practice of beadwork. And it's just great that people get to take away from it what they do. Because it's so heavy getting to work with ancestors, and it's just wonderful to be able to say hello to them. Like, I just came from the Idol Yorg down in Indianapolis, and even the cab driver, when I was driving up, I was like, what nation's here? And he's like, oh, none here. It used to be the Delawares. And I was like, well, they're very much alive. We have them here in Canada, so they'd been displaced. And even going down and seeing the largest collection of Great Lakes region art ever donated to a museum was great to interact with them. So I'm working with the youth and sending pictures and activating them and getting them excited to make work. And so when I get to see them make stuff, I'm just like so happy. And it reminds me that I need to send Melissa Twants some images that I took pictures of. Yeah. Like building up the new voices that are going to carry it on.
I think it's true that you're an artist activist in many ways. I think another thing I've noticed is that you're sort of and we were talking about it earlier with Victoria too, is that you're sort of a conceptual artist in disguise also.
I just don't stop working.
Yeah.
Like all the time I was like, oh my God, what is this about gifts? That was illegal. Do you know what I mean? Like what can a gift be? Yeah. But the gift is like everywhere. Yeah. Chimigwech, everybody. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone. Exhibition is open until September 14th. So you have ample time to come and see it. The bingo event, which I think is now called Intercity Bingo and Beat Talk Karaoke Bonanza, will be happening May 24th.
Oh my gosh.
At 5.
Make sure you're there.
Keep aware.
Yeah.
A conversation with some of the artists in your studio also happening later in August. So
is it August?
Be on the lookout for that.
Just not Santa Fe time.
Yeah.
That's my vacation.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. No, not during vacation.
Yeah.
It's time for rest. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Yay. Thank you.